Tonight, we won't sail to Valhalla's golden halls or clash shields beneath storm-bright skies. Instead, we'll follow a quieter thread one spun not from battle, but from breath itself. A gathering of gods, leaning in over a single vessel, letting their exhalations mingle until air became agreement, and agreement became life. From that breath was born Kvasir, a being so wise the air around him seemed tidied, as if thought itself had been shelved and dusted. He answered questions before they finished forming, his words soft enough to slip into the cracks of the world and fill them without force. But wisdom, like honey, tempts the hands that cannot make it. And somewhere between hospitality and hunger, two dwarves invited Kvasir into a conversation that would never end. His story would be stirred, strained, and sealed into 3 vessels, a drink that remembered blood, cloud, and the slow patience of brewing. Tonight, we'll walk alongside that silence. We'll feel the stillness just before the first sip, and hear the way wisdom hums when it's been distilled to amber. So dim the lights, let your breath find an even tide. And if you feel the edges of sleep begin to soften, that's just the old magic settling in. If myths like this carry you gently toward rest, you might consider subscribing. And if you leave the time and place you're listening from, perhaps the next tale will pour itself where you are. A drink, born not in a forge or a feast hall, but in the unlikeless council. A bowl set beneath the gods as they calmly pulled their breath into a puddle of agreement. The result, according to the old tellers who delivered such sentences with straight faces, was Kvasir, whose wisdom was so complete it behaved like good moss, covering every gap without fuss. He walked through the worlds, answering questions before they finished forming, which made conversation with him pleasantly short. For a while, he wandered and listened and advised, and the air around him felt organized, as if shelves had been dusted. It is said no riddles stumped him, not even the ones designed by people who treat riddles like uncooperative furniture. One day, in the unhurried way these things happen, 2 dwarves named Fjalar and Galar invited him in and asked for more wisdom than would fit in their house. The tale mentions murder here, but we will let the word nap. Imagine only that silence thickened, and afterward they had reason to brew. They mixed his blood with honey and let everything set until it agreed with itself. The liquid they nurtured was a mild amber that remembered the cloud it once might have been. Some remember 3 vessels involved, a courier, a big cauldron, and 2 casks called Bone and Sun, as if knowledge prefers multiple homes, like winter coats distributed among several closets. Fermentation enjoys patience, so we will give it a whole scene. The dwarves tended the drink the way bakers watch calm dough, checking bubbles as if reading tiny letters from yeast. The mead promised a gentle magic. Whoever sipped would speak with slippery ease, turning thoughts into lines that rhyme with themselves. This is the sort of claim poets adore and carpenters question, yet both professions keep a cup handy just in case. Honey from heather, wisdom from Kvasir, time from nobody in particular, it all curled together. A mild absurdity lives in the detail, but the best inspiration smells faintly of bees. If you have ever tried to solve a problem while a kettle hums, you know the architecture, warmth beneath, patient waiting above, and a small chorus of maybe gathering in the middle. The dwarves found the brew ready and, being practical, shared it with giants only when absolutely necessary. Eventually the casks moved, as valuable things do, by a chain of bargains and regrets until they settled near a family of rock-friendly people whose opinions about ownership were both strong and scenic. The mead reached the hands of Suttungr, a giant with a name that falls out of the mouth like a slowly tipped bucket. A story tells that the dwarves had been involved in an accident featuring his kin in the ocean, but there is no hurry to reassemble the details. What matters is that Suttungr took the drink away from possibilities and put it where patience lives. He asked his daughter Gunnlod to keep it safe in the mountain called Hnitbjorg, a name that sounds like a hammer hitting snow. She agreed with the calm assurance of someone who can outwait earthquakes. The mead sat in its 3 vessels, which is 3 more than a secret truly means, and the mountain considered itself a vault. It is pleasant, in a sleepy way, to picture a cave where whispering echoes twice and then decides echoing again would be repetitive. Gunnlod kept company with the casks and learned the quiet hobbies of guardians, listening to drip patterns, sorting pebbles by how much they resemble other pebbles, and occasionally tapping a rim to check if time still has tone. Somewhere beyond the glacier, the world went on arranging raids and oaths, but beneath the rock, the drink merely breved, a soft exhale of heather and answered questions. Odin heard of the treasure because Odin hears of everything that can be swallowed, sipped, or negotiated into being wisdom. He is a god of many hats and 1 eye, and the missing eye was paid at another well, for reasons that would make a separate gentle story. For this errand, he chose the hat called Balverker, a name meaning trouble crafted to sound like employment, and he walked among mortals as a laborer. This is an early form of networking. He hired himself to Suttungr's brother Baugi and performed strong work with quietly theatrical efficiency. There is a sharper version of the tale involving scythes and 9 unfortunate thralls, but we will let numbers and size fade into euphemism. Consider instead that Odin completed his tasks with the kind of speed that makes a foreman stare at the sun, suspecting time of bribery. When the season finished, Odin asked for a small favor that was large, a taste of the mead stored in the mountain. Baugi hesitated the way owners hesitate when keys lead to rooms they are not supposed to open. Even so, a drill was fetched, the auger called Roddy, which bites through rock carefully without dreaming of being a sword. They bored a neat tunnel. Odin, reverting to one of his smaller shapes, slid in like a rumor. Inside, the mountain felt like a library practicing silence. Gunnlod tended the casks, Akarir solemn as a moon, Bone and Sun attentive as owls, and sang to the hollow the way people hum to rooms when they are alone with important containers. Odin approached as politely as a disguised idea. The poetry emphasizes his promise, 3 nights for 3 sips, which is the sort of exchange that sounds balanced, even if no one measures. He kept her company while the mountain cooled and warmed according to whatever seasons do under stone. They spoke in the innocent grammar of guardians and wanderers who both know doors. When at last he lifted the lid, he took not sips, but everyone's share, which is a very Odin solution to arithmetic. The trick is traditional. The tone need not be. We only note that Gunnlod watched without panic, and that the room did not echo with surprise, because the mountain understood roles. Wisdom exists to move, guards exist to remember they once held it, gods exist to compose exits. The exit was a bird because of course it was. Odin became an eagle large enough to shadow rivers, but light enough to keep promises. He leapt down the tunnel like a long breath and folded into the air outside. It would be exciting to animate pursuit here. Suttungr also wore an eagle, and the sky adopted the posture of chase, but the mood tonight prefers logistics. 2 very competent birds traced patient arcs, as if comparing wingspans for a catalog. Between Odin's beak and his throat, he carried the mead, and one suspects he discovered mid-flight that carrying inspiration is like balancing soup. Speed causes outcomes. Some droplets escaped and fell toward Midgard, which is a polite way of saying accident became policy. The drops landed on fields and into mouths not previously marked on any heroic list. A storyteller whose best audience was 3 cows in a fence, a child speaking in meter at dinner, a woman mending sails who suddenly named the wind, a man who discovered insult poetry while trying to say hello. Later poets would call these stray gifts the fool's share, with the irony that many careers begin exactly there. It is also told that the jars kept their dignity. A great part of the mead reached Odin's home, and from then on inspiration could be borrowed with ceremony. In halls where skalds later chanted, Their breath smelled faintly of heather and a decision not entirely theirs. We can stay a little longer in the air with the bird rather than arriving anywhere. The sky above the north has room for long stories told slowly. Below him, fjords yawned like friendly mouths, and small fires on headlands forgot to flicker while watching feathers pass. A traveling goose considered joining formation, thought better of it, and filed a report to weather. Odin angled toward the keepers of his own table, where runes hang like notes on a refrigerator door. The mead hummed in his belly like a hive rehearsing. It contained Kvasir's aftertaste, but not his certainty. Certainty is an endangered flower in the gardens of gods. What it offered instead was access, a key made of metaphor that opens rooms you did not know were inside you. This is why honey is a helpful metaphor. Bees carry maps that look like dances, and dances are very good at explaining rooms. If at any time in this narration you feel your thoughts sway in small hexagons, the effect is intentional. The casks back in the mountain learned their new emptiness with dignified poise. If containers could shrug, they would do so on a long timeline. Gunnlod remained in her chamber with the patient grace of someone who protected something that now exists everywhere. She listened to the drip again and may have smoothed a pebble. In a different style of telling she would be angry. In this version, she texts no one and lets the quiet finish. The auger Roddy, still lodged in the hole, admired the clean edges of its work and decided retirement suited it. Outside, Valgi stared at the tunnel like a man reading the last page, first in discovering that the book refuses to end. Fjalar and Galar, the dwarves, went on to other projects, perhaps inventing instruments that sound like sleep when tuned poorly. Suttungr acknowledged the change with a blustery guess that toppled nothing. Even gods require opponents who do not draft quarterly reports. Now the mead circulates, that is its nature. Odins and non-Odins have sipped. Think of it as a lending library with cups. Some who drink become precise, others become prolific. A few learn to rhyme the names of knives with the verbs of weather, which is more useful than it sounds. The old sources keep 3 names, and scholars love them the way gardeners love labels stuck in soil. Ugur, bone, sun. The labels help us pretend we have collected the plant. Meanwhile, the plant continues to grow where it likes. When poets in longhouses lifted their horns, they practiced the special breathing that makes stories march, and then turns marching into rocking. The best ones remembered that the drink grants ease to tongue, but not necessarily facts to brain. Accuracy still asks to be invited. This is why long songs include as much travel as arrival. It also explains certain evenings where the mead's lesser cousin, the fool's share, overflowed and produced poems about goats that would have preferred anonymity. If we look back at Kvasir, we see a circle with a soft seam. A being distilled from shared breath became a drink that gives words the energy of breath again. People who have never met agree for a minute on how to listen. It is not a moral so much as a geometry. In the geometry, Fjalar and Galar behave like hinges, Suttungr like a lock, Gunnlod like the velvet behind a jewel, Odin like a hand that knows all locks eventually open toward somewhere. The casks are the drawers in a desk where someone keeps their favorite pens. The auger Roddy is the old reliable coffee spoon. The eagle costume is the jacket you reach for when you do not know which weather is going on outside. A myth cannot help but carry wardrobes with it. If your eyelids are growing heavier, it is because the mead's after idea is finally doing the simple work it was brewed for. Kvasir's wisdom, which once spoke in completed sentences, now dissolves into warm patience, and patience is an underrated lullaby. The mountain sits, the casks breathe out the last scent of honey. The river mouths widen and narrow according to the moon. And somewhere a novice poet falls asleep while composing a metaphor comparing snoring to a dwarf hammering, which nearly works. If you are waiting for the dramatic chase to resume, let it wander without you. 2 very large birds have landed, folded their costumes, and gone indoors for quiet tea. Inspiration is already back in the cupboards, poured into smaller flasks labeled for later use. The labels written carefully in neat runes by a hand that knows how to write without waking anyone. The story could continue, and often does, but like a good mead left on the shelf, it prefers the company of time in a cool room. Tonight the shelves are steady, the honey has remembered flowers and the bowl that once held the gods. Spit has become the kind of bowl that holds only air, and the idea that intelligence, when brewed gently enough, can taste like rest. You might not think a priceless drink would change owners during a quiet conversation beside a very slow ocean. Yet that is more or less how the Mead of Poetry drifted toward a giant who liked his agreements carved in stone. The dwarves who brewed it had been living with the complicated silence that follows a brilliant idea. Completed under questionable circumstances, they had decanted wisdom into honey and honey into memory, and memory into 3 containers with names grand enough to count as relatives. The liquid rested there like golden dusk made patient. Travelers passed their door and sniffed the air and forgot their errands. A gull perched on the beam outside the workshop and composed a serviceable couplet about fish. If you're still awake after this first gentle swirl, you are welcome to touch the little rune that promises more sleep-friendly myths later, though, if your pillow wins now, the mead will consider your absence an appreciative review. All good brews prefer an audience that closes its eyes. Word goes that a giant named Suttungr arrived with a grievance shaped like an afternoon tide. His brother had met the sea on the wrong terms, and grief does make even mountains feel slightly taller. The dwarves poured regret into the usual languages, apology, craft, explaining things to the floorboards, and then reached for the other language they spoke well, offering. They presented the mead as compensation, a gift that carries a curse simply by existing, because anything that gives words their own wings will start choosing where to land. Sutton wrestled with the stillness of cliffs meeting wind. His hands were the size of small shelves. He could hold a cask as a person holds a thought, balanced and quietly certain. He tasted a drop, not enough to brag about, and his breath slowed in the way breath slows when it realizes it has been running ahead of itself for years. He did not smile exactly. Giants tend to measure smiles by how far they can be seen from a lighthouse, but he accepted, and acceptance in that room felt like a tide changing its mind. A gift like that does not travel without a plan, so the plan unfolded at the pace of granite making up its mind. Suttungr did not keep the mead in any hall where laughter might trip and spill it. He appointed a destination that sounded like a promise written by stones, the mountain called Hnitbjorg. The name clicks in the mouth like 2 rocks agreeing. Some say it means the ramming mountain, others say the striking mountain, and both are correct, provided you imagine the motion happening only once per century, very politely. He selected 3 steady helpers, cousins whose job in most stories is to carry things that hurt other stories when they are dropped. They padded the casks with wool and moss, tied them with ropes spun from bark, and moved through valleys without bending grass. People who later heard the tale preferred to picture giants stomping, that the ground remembers they walked as if holding full teacups. The route wandered beside cold rivers that narrated their progress in syllables of melt. When the procession stopped for a rest, Suttungr checked each lid without opening it, the way careful parents check sleeping children. He asked the dwarves for the names again, not because he forgot, but because names become steadier when spoken where weather can hear. Ekkerir for the big cauldron, Bone and Sun for the casks, 3 syllables for pouring, 1 for pausing, and a nose full of heather for the memory. A few midges drifted over and attempted poetry. Their line breaks were ambitious, their rhymes accidental, and the mead remained politely unimpressed. Somewhere on a moor, a sheep remembered a proverb it had never learned. The sky turned the color of worn pewter and stayed there for the rest of the journey, as if trying not to distract the plot. Hnitbjorg rose from the plain like a slow solution to a simple problem. It had a door that was not always a door, and a passage that grew narrower in the presence of layers. Suttungr brought the mead inside as carefully as an oath. The mountain cleared its throat with a rockfall in the next valley and then subsided. He placed the vessels in a chamber where stone curved overhead like the inside of cupped hands. The room collected drips from a seam of snow mold, one drip every few heartbeats, and the sound taught time how to tiptoe. There was a shelf of flat stones that looked exactly like they wanted to be inventory, and Suttungr stacked 3 beside them simply to see if the shelf would approve. He breathed the cavern air and decided it smelled like honesty wearing cold wool. Then he turned to the question that gives this scene its comfortable center. Who would keep watch? Gunnlod, his daughter, had the right kind of stillness. She understood that guard work is not about glaring, but about listening at several sizes at once. She could hear wind deciding which ravine to favor, and also hear drop number 37 after midnight. Her hair held the light in a way that made torches believe they had already done their job. Suttungr explained the duties without drama. The mead, he said, is both gift and curse. It lifts tongues like larks, and sometimes lands them in fields not meant for singing. Keep it safe from thieves and from overeager guests, and from the occasional poet who thinks rules are suggestions with good posture. Gunnlod nodded. She walked a circle around the 3 vessels, the little circle acknowledging the big circle of responsibility. She laid a hand on Kvasir and felt the depth of it like a lake that can remember every bird that ever looked down. Scenes in mountains do not hurry, so the second rhythm begins with the slow establishment of habit. Each morning she unbarred the door that was not always a door and let in a sliver of outside. It pulled on the floor like a clean thought. She checked the seals with a fingertip and whispered to the lids as if they were friends who preferred polite conversation. She recorded the temperature by touching the stone and comparing it to the back of her wrist. She sorted the cave's loose pebbles by roundness and kept a ledger of the sorts of roundness found. This is how guardians stay sane, by treating details as pets. Once a day, she tapped each vessel with a knuckle and listened for a note. Kvasir answered with a low tone that settled in the ribs. Bone replied in a voice like a wooden bowl thinking about soup, and Sun chimed in a pitch just above worry. If a tone changed, she adjusted torches, drafts, or the distance between the casks until the harmony returned. In winter, the rock breath cooled the air to the wisdom of wool, and in summer, a whisper of underground fire traveled the corridors and kept the lids from cracking. The mead breathed very gently, the way bread does in the last moments before it decides it is itself. Above ground, Suttungr taught the valley to be uninteresting. Pathways approached the mountain and then discovered reasons to go somewhere else. Hunters believed game had migrated to new neighborhoods. Berries voted to ripen later. On maps copied by patient hands by the light of smoking lamps, the cartographers wrote stone and drew nothing. When travelers asked locals about Hnitbjorg, the locals used the kind of shrug that contains a whole afternoon. This is how secrets look from the outside, a tidy arrangement of ignorance that keeps everyone's kettles hot. Inside, Gunnlod's tasks deepened. She learned the drip's seasonal dialects, the frail crunch that indicates new frost on old stone, the soft scratch of a bat editing its sleep. She sang only rarely, and when she did, she chose melodies that moved like rivers trying to forget bridges. Every object nearby achieved a personality, as objects do when people let them. The ladle used for sampling had opinions about rim cleanliness. The long-handled spoon preferred to lie on its back thinking about sky. The cork mallet was a traditionalist and liked to be set down head first. A basket of cloths enjoyed the view. It is a minor fact, but a pleasing one, that cloth woven from nettles accepts the scent of honey faster than cloth woven from flax. The nettles were strong but not stubborn. They released sweetness back into the air when asked. Gunnlod kept a notebook of such findings and filled it page by drowsy page. At the bottom of one leaf, she wrote that wisdom seems heavier at dusk, and lighter just before dawn, a useful note for anyone who has tried to move ideas from one room to another without spilling. In the third stretch of quiet, visitors appear because even the best vault collects stories at the door. Some were weather. Thunder came one evening and practiced its outside voice across 3 ridges, then reconsidered and spoke softly into the valley. The mountain declined to answer. One winter, a fox slept in the lee of the threshold for 7 nights and left exactly 7 whiskers as rent. On the 4th spring, a lost shepherd leaned against the north face and played a pipe absent-mindedly, and underground the mead tasted the tune and remembered bees. There were also people who meant to come. Poets have an uncanny sense for locked rooms. A few arrived with pockets full of metaphors and went away with pockets full of the same, puzzled by the way they suddenly felt better at endings. Gunnlod did not greet them. She trusted in an interesting past and in the patience of stone, and in her father's advice that some answers travel faster in circles. She did, however, receive 3 messengers from Suttungr's household each year, men who counted winter by the growth of a particular icicle and summer by the chatter of a specific brook. They brought salt, fresh wicks, new cork, and sometimes a better broom. They also brought news in careful handfuls. Dwarves had taken up a new argument with geometry. The geese were rehearsing a different letter V. Someone in a distant hall claimed to have written a poem that made a door unlock itself, though this turned out to be a misunderstanding involving a draft. The messengers stayed for an hour and left with their hats full of cool air, which they poured liberally over their heads when the valley became ordinary again. Gunnlod listened to everything and stored it in the quiet alcove of her mind, where stories wait until they find their shape. Old myths say guardians grow lonely. The better detail is that guardians grow specific. You would think a mountain room with 3 famous containers would prefer silence without incident, but incident still visits, only in very slow fonts. One day, a crack opened under the far wall, an event like a sentence becoming a paragraph. It admitted a new breeze and the faintest smell of iron. For 3 days, the tones of the vessels shifted, one hair lower than another, until the harmony felt as if someone had placed a warm hand on tired lungs. Gunnlod moved a torch 2 finger widths to the left, and the balance returned. Another time the drip paused for a whole hour, and she discovered by walking the corridor with her palm against the stone that a pocket of frost had decided to take up residence and needed convincing. She stood beside it and talked about summer until the ice agreed to share. The mead had no opinion about these debates. It was busy not being ordinary honey. Now the last scene, where we slate everything to continue without alarms. Suttungr visited at the turn of a year when the moon forgot to be punctual. He stooped to enter and straightened slowly, breathing shorter because rooms insist on sizing giants the way baskets size apples. Gunnlod lifted the torch, and he measured the lids with the same old careful gaze. He did not ask to taste. A guardian's success is the absence of sampling. He walked the circle she had walked and added one slow nod at the place where the drip echoed best. He told her about work in the valley, about repairing a bridge that had been loyal to the wrong. River about a cloud that resembled a memory, about how grief sometimes returns to sit in the doorway just to check the hinges. She told him the tones were holding, the nettle claws remained obedient, and the crack in the wall now hosted a breeze that behaved as if it had paid rent. They stood a while and let the mountain do the speaking, which is a conversation that reads like rest. When he left, the valley resumed its unremarkable duties, and the paths went back to pretending they led nowhere. Gunnlod held her post. She counted small rocks. She scrubbed a ring of frost from a hard-to-reach niche and watched it become water and then nothing. In later chapters, someone in a wandering hat will arrive with plans dressed as employment, and the Augerati will likely develop an opinion. But that belongs to a different evening. Tonight the mead is a thought kept warm under stone. It glows enough to teach shadows how to soften their edges, and it murmurs so gently that the room cannot decide whether it is hearing a future or the gold remembering where bees once danced. If your mind is still awake, let it sit on the shelf near the inventory of roundness and choose a pebble. Turn it once. Hear how the drip pronounces yes and the drip after that agrees. Imagine lids that sleep without squeaking and a guardian who knows precisely how far a torch must be, from honey to keep both safe and bright. The world above will continue, and below, in the chamber called necessary by stone, the three containers will breathe in unison, singing to themselves in notes of heather and patience until the door that is not always a door decides to open for a different story. You might not expect the cleverest plan in the 9 realms to begin with a job application, yet Odin's great scheme for borrowing the Mead of Poetry starts the way many schemes do, with a hat, a new name, and a willingness to lift things in front of witnesses. If you're still awake in a few minutes, you can always tap the polite little rune that asks for more sleepy stories later. If drowsiness claims you sooner, consider it a reference letter written by your eyelids on his behalf. On the morning he set out, the Allfather did not look like thunder or royalty, or even a particularly well-funded traveler. He looked like a man with mud on his boots and patience in his pockets, which is the most respectable camouflage a god can wear. He chose one of his many names for this errand bulwarker, a title that means something like worksmith of trouble, though tonight we will translate it as contractor specializing in unusual outcomes. He walked down to where fields pretend to be sea and the wind rehearses for winter, and he knocked on the door of Baugi, who kept a granary that whispered to itself during storms and had a brother whose name the hills tried not to repeat too loudly. Baugi, like most people with real work to do, appreciated help that arrived already holding a tool. Odin presented himself as a laborer, the kind of man who knows where to stand when a wagon wheel forgets its purpose, and the kind who carries a length of rope so politely that the rope behaves. There is a sharper version of this tale involving 9 sighs and a harvest that ended with a crowd of unfortunate sighs. We will let the scythe snap. In our gentler telling, Balverker proves himself through the art of being competent at unglamorous angles. He stacks the hay so evenly that mice reconsider chaos. He sets fence posts by listening for the note the earth prefers, then taps once more to tune the field to itself. He mends a gate without judging the previous carpenter, which is the highest craft. He does not brag. He allows the hinges to brag for him by closing with a quiet dignity. At mealtimes, he sits with the other workers and eats slowly, as if respecting the engineering of bread. Baugi notices how quickly the days complete themselves under this stranger's rhythm, as if time feels flattered to be measured by such tidy hands. After a season of effort shaped like ease, the new hire requests a favor that is small in voice and large in consequence. He asks to taste the mead kept by Baugi's brother Suttungr, a treasure resting somewhere inside the mountain that owns its own weather. Baugi's eyebrows perform a brief counsel. They have heard the stories and they recommend caution. Still, gratitude loosens the hinges of the heart, and Belverker speaks in the tone of a man who fixes problems rather than collecting them. Baugi agrees to try. They carry no banners and invite no witnesses. Instead, they walk toward Hnitbjorg, which pronounces itself like a stone making up its mind, and they bring an augur named Radi. In the old lists, tools often receive names because the people who use them have learned the value of conversation. Radi is that friend who shows up with a toolbox and leaves only after the coffee cools correctly. It is a spiral of temper and purpose, fond of clean curls of rock and bored by any drama that cannot be solved by clockwise persuasion. The mountain is not particularly impressed by visitors, even polite ones, but it respects procedure. Baugi presses his ear to the stone and feels the deeper hush that indicates a chamber thinking private thoughts. Belverker places his palm against the face and hums a note that resembles a low wind remembering. Roddy begins to turn. Chips of rock tick into a neat pile, each one a small opinion about pressure. The auger travels inward, but not quickly, because haste and stone argue about the meaning of progress. Every so often, Baugi pauses and blows into the hole. The air comes back cold, which is the mountain's way of saying almost. The last thin layer yields with the sound of a throat clearing before a better idea. Belverker tests the opening by turning into a creature with less commitment to diameter. A snake suits the moment smooth, foldable, uninterested in applause. He slips through, and for a breath, the entire plan rests on a single rib moving in the right direction. Then he has gone into the mountain, leaving Baugi with Roddy, a tidy coil of dust, and the powerful feeling of having held the door for a rumor. Inside of his twilight, even when torches burn. Hnitbjorg spends centuries practicing the art of quiet, and the chamber that holds the mead has perfected it. There's the steady drip of water that teaches patience to stone. There is the lean outline of Kvasir, the great vessel, and the two smaller casks, Bone and Sun, positioned beside it like thoughtful companions. There is the guardian, Gunnlod, whose posture tells you she has been instructed by both silence and its echo. Odin resumes a shape-better conversation and stands the way a polite stranger stands in a library aisle, not blocking the shelves, not pretending he has no favorites. Gunnlod regards him without hurry. The stories that prefer sharper flavors describe suspicion sharpening into challenge, but tonight the air prefers mutual appraisal conducted at a pace friendly to tea. Odin speaks first with the voice he uses when he is gathering a story rather than scattering it. He explains that words sometimes need new corridors, and he has practiced at installing such corridors where no one is crushed and the walls keep their dignity. He admires the room, which pleases the mountain, and he praises the craftsmanship of the lids, which pleases the vessels, and he compliments the arrangement of torches, which pleases the shadows precisely as much as they allow themselves to be pleased. Gumma listens. She knows the brew's history well enough to tell it backwards. She could begin with accidents near the sea and end with gods spitting into a bowl, but she chooses to say less because guardianship is partly the art of denying urgency's request for a chair. When she asks his name, Odin chooses one that does not pretend to be final. Belverker will do. The syllables sit in the room without rattling anything. In the second slow scene, the bargain invents itself, the way moss invents a carpet on rock that never asks for one. Odin proposes time for time, 3 nights for 3 measured sips, which sounds geometrically fair even before anyone opens a cask. He will keep company with the guardian as the mountain turns in its sleep. He will talk in the careful way stone likes. He will count drips with her until numbers decide to imitate rain. Gunnlod studies him with the attention of someone who knows that promises prefer specific chairs. She has watched Winter decide to leave and return 3 times in an afternoon. She is not impressed by clocks, yet this guest understands temperature. He adjusts the torch by the width of a knuckle and the room's breath evens. He sets a small flat stone under 1 foot of a stand and the cask steadies. His fingers trace runes into the soot on the wall-only practice strokes, but they treat the wall like a page that gets to keep itself. She recognizes steadiness when she hears it. The 3 nights agree to exist. Night 1 behaves like a rehearsal dinner where nothing is expected to be remembered. Odin asks questions with long corridors in them. He inquires what the meat sounds like when the lids are not listening. Gumma answers that it sounds like bees debating a metaphor. He asks whether the mountain keeps secrets from its own echoes. She decides that it does because no household shares everything. He asks what temperature the lids prefer, and she replies that Kvasir likes the cool edge of wool while Bone and Sun enjoy evenings when the flames practice not flickering. They speak about nettle cloths and cork mallets, and the proper resting angle of ladles. The kind of conversation that sounds trivial until you love something. Odin tells a little about a certain one-eyed traveler and a well that gives up knowledge as if reluctantly removing a ring. He does not mention the price because the eye is unimportant here, a coin already spent on a different bridge. They drowse intermittently, taking turns at listening for changes in the cask's breathing, which never comes but is nice to imagine. Night 2 finds the room even more itself. The drip, having been counted, seems proud and becomes slightly more punctual. Odin produces small stories the way a pocket produces string. He speaks of ravens who return with rumors folded into their feathers, of a spear that never misses and a throne that never needs to turn around because sounds arrive from everywhere equally, of disguises that prefer simple clothes because fabric behaves better when it thinks no one is looking. He asks for a song, and Gunnlod obliges with a melody learned from gravel. It swings slower than lullabies, but arrives at the same place. He asks what she would do if words learned to fly out of jars and into every mouth, even the ones not prepared with metaphors, and she says that words do as they like and need, only be reminded to wipe their feet. The torches lean a little toward her voice. When silence returns, it is the comfortable kind, the kind that makes floors circular and shoulders warm. No one mentions the mead, which is a form of politeness toward the future. Night 3 belongs to thresholds. Odin stands with his hands on the rims, as if the lids were very old books his grandmother used to read. He does not hurry them. He turns each seal the way people turn the final page of a letter from someone alive far away. The room releases a scent of heather and the idea of sunlight filtered through bees. He takes his sips one from each vessel, and in the sleepy version of this tale, we do not count beyond 3 because counting multiplies edges. The taste travels through him like carefully folded light. It does not make him louder, it makes him align. Gunnlod watches with neither surprise nor alarm. Guardianship has prepared her for the moment when stewardship becomes memory. Odin thanks the room aloud, which lets stone be a witness, and he thanks Gunnlod in a voice that acknowledges how much patience weighs. He seals everything exactly as it was. The lids close with a sound that the mountain recognizes as tidy. The third scene fades into a corridor where problems resemble furniture. You move an inch to make a room truer. Odin, now carrying more alignment than before, steps back through Hnitbjorg along the passage Roddy chewed earlier. The augur, waiting with the contentment of a tool that knows it has done something once and therefore forever, receives a small stroke along its wooden haft, a compliment disguised as maintenance. Outside, Baugi sits on a rock that has been smoothing him into itself for hours. He looks up with a question in his eyebrows that does not need a word. Belverker gives a small nod that also refuses vocabulary. They cover the tunnel with stones arranged to look as if they always belonged there. The wind cleans its face on the ridge. Field stretch. A fox steps from a shadow to yawn politely near a juniper, and then resumes pretending is made entirely of shrub. From here, the sharper retellings launch into pursuit and talons as big as tax policies. We will stay with logistics a little longer because logistics are soporific in the best way. A plan that began with labor continues with careful walking. Odin takes the long way across the valley so he does not bruise any story already in progress. He stops to admire a boundary stone that has understood its assignment for centuries. He practices swallowing slowly. Inspiration, even when stolen politely, deserves a good carrier. He rehearses thank you speeches for rooms that will soon be louder than is wise. A raven drops onto a fence post and offers a sideways look that translates roughly as proceed. Another raven answers from farther along the path with the identical word proceed, because twins enjoy being redundant. Somewhere in the sky, a future turns over in its sleep. Meanwhile, inside Hnitbjorg, the fourth scene unspools as Gunnlod rearranges the quiet. She inventories the pebbles again, not because the count will change, but because counting itself steadies the air. She touches the lids, which are still lids and will continue to be lids. The mead feels lighter and more correct, like a story after someone removes the argument that did not belong. She notes the way the flames stand when left alone. She adds a sentence to her notebook. Wisdom does not empty, it circulates. She extinguishes 2 torches and watches the smoke choose exits. She hears the drip decide that being counted has made it brave. She sits with her back against the stone and discovers that the wall too would like to rest. Outside, Baugi returns his borrowed attention to the granary's hinges. Ratty dozes under a cloth that smells faintly of wool and decision. The mountain keeps its promise of being exactly where it is. If your eyes are nearly closed, imagine the plan continuing at its careful speed. A disguised god folds back into familiar shapes as gently as a shepherd folds a blanket. A guardian learns the pleasure of being the person who knows the weight of keys, even when the lock has agreed to think for itself. A brother in a valley hears fewer troublesome rumors than you would expect, and spends an afternoon oiling doors because oil doors calm mouths. The casks in their chamber do what the best containers do. They remember the shape of what they have held and lend that memory to the air. Far away, tailies will say that an eagle crossed the sky with gracious theft in its beak, and somewhere a drop will tumble and stain the world permanently with meter and metaphor. But that is another evening's patience. For now, the plan hums under its breath, disguised among mortals, as the ordinary relief of good work well placed, and the bargain rests. Without edges, 3 nights equaling 3 sips, equaling the feeling you get when a long hallway ends. Exactly where it should, with a door that opens as quietly as sleep. You might not think a bird could carry a whole conversation in its mouth, yet that is how Odin chooses to travel when the air outside the mountain decides to be patient with him. The chamber of Hnitbjorg has already learned the sound of lids closing. It has memorized the way a torch leans when a promise is kept. Now the god stands at the tunnel, not grand, not stern, only exact, and he folds himself into an eagle, the way a careful person folds a blanket with the corners lined up. The feathers arrive in long, quiet rows. The beak forms without haste. Between tongue and throat, he shapes a pocket roomy enough for a little mead and a lot of intention. He takes the first lift of air with a slow push that convinces gravity this is all rehearsal. Behind him, the augur Ratty rests against stone, pleased to be a tool at leisure. The mountain lets out a sigh that sounds like rock, promising to remember where it put the door. If you are still awake a minute from now, you may nod at whatever rune on your screen asks you to come back later. If you drift early, the eagle will count your nap as enthusiastic applause. He squeezes through the round hole, and that is the only dramatic verb we will use tonight. Outside, the valley is one long bowl of pure light. Clouds practice staying still. The eagle sets his wings neither wide nor narrow, just correct, and the air makes room in the way it does for weather that knows the map by heart. He flies at a speed you could measure with a rocking chair. The beak holds its careful cargo, not clamped with stress, but cradled with craft. People who run kitchens know this skill. Carry the bowl level. Step as if the floor is considering your argument. The mead tastes like heather and solve riddles, and the warmth that bees feel when the hive's idea lines up with the day. The wind at this height arrives in soft bands, cool and then cool again, sometimes with a thin stripe of pine or salt, sometimes with nothing at all, which is the favorite flavor of quiet. Below, fjords fold themselves into long silver spoons. Cliffs pretend to be walls built for giants who prefer privacy. Water remembers to breathe. Once in a while, a raven drifts along beside him with the leisurely confidence of an off-duty letter carrier. One says proceed in a voice that is mostly feather. The other says proceed back because twins love a chorus. Far inland, Gunnlod sits in the chamber and listens to the drip, as if counting the seconds of a watch, and the watch agrees to be counted. The room has learned a new arrangement of silence and likes it. The eagle carries this knowledge in the slow angle of his wings. He is not rushing toward Asgard. He is escorting the mead through a change of address. The air grows brighter, and then duller, and then bright again. This is the kind of weather you get when the sky cannot decide which tunic to wear. The eagle appreciates indecision that keeps volume low. He tilts once to watch a herd of reindeer draw soft commas on a snowfield. He tilts again to inspect a narrow boat hugging a black strand, a fisherman drawing nets with the respectful boredom of someone who trusts the ocean but still counts fingers afterward. The boat's hull creaks in a pitch that pairs pleasantly with wing beats. Odin stores that pitch. The mead likes to travel with sounds. A small fact, poets later argue whether the cup from Kvasir was poured into the beak first, or whether bone and sun contributed in a neat sequence like steps on a ladder. The gods who were there do not answer. They have decided that schedules are only impressive in winter. What matters is weight and angle, and the rule about turning slowly while holding something that behaves like thought. The eagle keeps to a path only he can see, a seam between gusts. He adds height by small breaths. Each updraft arrives like a hand held under the belly of a patient cat. Now there is movement behind him, the kind of movement mountains notice before birds do. Suttungr has discovered the tunnel, or has discovered the change in the oxygen of a room, or has discovered the mathematics of lids and absence. He too becomes an eagle because Norse stories enjoy repeating his shape until everyone agrees it is a good one. His wingspan dwarfs fields. His feathers hold the color of thunder that chose to sit down. He launches with a dignity that looks like slowness until you realize the air is already adapting to make way. The pursuit, in brisker versions of this story, arrives like a drumline. In this version, it is paperwork. Two large birds file flight plans with the sky and begin to follow them. Suttungr is not angry. He is exact in a different direction. He has invested in a vault and would like to keep accounting honest. Odin feels the weight of that wish in the air. He does not answer with speed. He answers with neatness. He banks so gently that a thread could still be threaded on his back. He slides across a ridge where the wind has opinions and asks the opinions to use their indoor voice. Down in a hidden valley, a shepherd looks up and sees two shadows like slow memories. The sheep pretend not to notice. They prefer plot lines with grass. The distance closes by increments so small they can be written as fractions of rain. Suttungr's breath drafts the clouds. Odin calculates how much cargo to swallow at once and how much to keep close to tongue for finer control. It is a delicate operation, like pouring from a full kettle into a narrow thermos while standing on one foot. The mead hums with its own intention. It likes to be carried by someone who knows how to assemble a story. It does not object to giants, but it remembers that giants tend to measure excellence by the boulder and the bellow, and the drink prefers instruments that fit into pockets. As the chase crosses a series of inlets, the sea produces a lace of foam that seems to encourage calm. Suttungr's wingtip touches a cloud and leaves a slow, healing scar. Odin adds 2 wing beats and nothing more. In Asgard, where the halls are set to receive, someone has noticed a new tremor in the weather. Skalds find their throats clearing on their own. A long trough is dragged into the courtyard, the kind that catches grain when you pour too quickly. It is a practical plan disguised as hospitality. The gods, very good at optics, let the trough look ornamental. The sky changes again, taking on the pleasant pewter of late afternoon. Odin feels the pull of home the way a needle feels north, not as a command, but as a habit that likes to succeed. He aims for the gate where the air learns to sparkle out of politeness, and the bridge Bifrost hums a tone that makes hooves and feathers believe in manners. Suttungr follows to the threshold. discouraged less by walls than by the growing sense that his ledger will balance with a lost column called inevitable. He has flown far enough to make anger expensive. He chooses to be tired instead. The gods, from very far off, appear as a collection of steady shapes. Odin opens the mouth of the plan and lets the mead consider its options. Some of it travels exactly where it should, sliding into waiting vats as if choosing familiar chairs. Some of it, despite every careful angle learned from kitchens, departs the line and invents a side story. It drops. It shines like thin gold rain for a moment, and then becomes taste on tongues waiting below where no invitation was sent. This is the part of the myth the skalds never hurry, because accidents are a curriculum. The droplets land in scattered places that refuse to be a map. A man, leaning on a fence and thinking about nothing in particular, finds himself counting syllables without meaning to. A woman sewing a sail hears the rhythm of thread-crossed canvas and names the wind so well it blushes. A child throws a stone into a pond and narrates the ripples with a voice too serious for its size. A cook stirring porridge discovers that similes prevent burning. A shepherd who has never used a metaphor compares his favorite Awe to a warm cloud and knows he has done something worth saving. The old texts have a term scald Fjalar, the fool's share of the mead, given to those who did not sign for it. Later schools try to sort these poets by quality, as if safety inspectors could visit dreams. The mead is uninterested in transcripts. It prefers the sound of an idea, finding exactly the word that lets it lie down and sleep. Odin lands without ceremony. The trick of arriving is not to startle the ground. He shakes out feathers and becomes himself by small degrees, like a picture coming into focus with a patient hand on the lens. The trough glows with fresh order. Horns are lifted for tasting, but not many. Gods know better than to drink while the air is still organizing itself. They smell heather and the faint metal of honey around iron rims. They say it is good, and by good they mean it sits on the tongue as if it already belongs to yesterday's memory. Someone asks how the flight was, in the tone people use when they want reassurance that the furniture will not be rearranged during dinner. Odin tells the truth softly. The air was cooperative. The giant was punctual. The mead behaved. The sky performed to standard. He does not mention the spillage right away, because he can feel the drops doing their work across distances too interesting to interrupt. In a few days, the world will report back by accident. Carvings on door lintels will begin to rhyme with their shadows. Cowherds will improve their insults and then better their blessings. There will be a surge in competent toasts. Suttungr, perched on a boundary stone, thinks long thoughts about custody and circulation. He knows what was guarded is now everywhere guarded by use. He is a practical giant, and practical giants are aware that value sometimes increases when it refuses to stay put. He leaves a feather the size of a flagstone to mark that the account is closed, not settled, but closed, like a shop that will open again in another generation. The wind lifts the feather twice and then lays it down. Gunnlod, in the mountain, leans against the wall and feels the room testing its new balance the way a child tests a boot. She writes another note in her book for future guardians. When a drink goes traveling, the shelves learn to be lighter. She extinguishes one torch. The smoke finds the crack and remembers the road home. The mead now attends uninvited breakfasts. It shows up at dusk when someone is trying to fix a leaky roof and suggests a couplet that convinces shingles to stay. It visits funerals and teaches a grandchild to speak the names in an order that makes sure none are forgotten. It trespasses in workshops and permits a carpenter to compare a well-fit joint to the handshake of a river and a stone. It settles beside a spindle until thread looks like a story unspooling at the pace of breath. It does not fix everything. It was never designed to fix anything. It was designed to oil the hinge between thought and mouth, and to make that hinge satisfyingly quiet. We could finish with the banquet, with horn tips touching and measured promises about how to store a treasure that refuses to be entirely stored. But the better end is hardly an end at all. Odin sits a little apart and lets the aftertaste behave like a small lamp behind the ribs. He thinks of Kvasir, who once answered questions before they finished speaking. He thinks of dwarves who brewed regret into utility, which is a respectable craft. He thinks of a mountain room that will keep keeping the quiet, because quiet enjoys having a place to be. He thinks of the drops that went elsewhere and have already started careers without resumes. The night lifts its lid and allows a few stars to breathe. Somewhere a farm dog hears a poet rehearse under his breath and decides to wag along to the meter. If your own meter is thin now, let it slow. Let it become the speed of a large bird folding its wings. The tail is not closing. It is settling onto its shelf where the jars never quite stop breathing and the labels are clear and calm. And the air holds a trace of honey long after the door is softly shut. You might not think anyone could hear dew deciding which blade of grass to choose, but Heimdall says the world is full of very tiny votes, and somebody should count them. He stands at the foot of the rainbow bridge where the colors pool like melted glass and then rise, slow as bread, toward the sky, and he listens to things that forgot they were making noise. It is a quiet kind of heroism, the sort that comes with a good cloak and a very tidy schedule, and if you're still awake. A little later, you can always tap some discreet rune to be nudged toward the next drowsy myth. If sleep gets there first, the bridge will mark your absence with a soft check mark and carry on. The night is cool but not unfriendly. The planks of Bifrost gleam as if someone polished them with rain. Down below, Midgard breathes in the low purr of oceans and barns and far-off kettles. Heimdall wears armor the shade of sunrise, pretending it isn't coming yet. He carries the horn that nobody is supposed to blow, which is the divine version of keeping fireworks in a museum, and he practices not blowing it with exquisite skill. He is the Watcher, the quieter twin of thunder, and his house at Hnitbjorg sits like a warm lamp at the very edge of heavens, where visitors have the courtesy to arrive slowly. Heimdall comes from 9 mothers, which is the kind of family detail that makes scribes shift in their seats. The 9 were wave maidens, sisters of the sea, and there are nights when he hears their laughter braided into storm foam and remembers that his cradle rocked to the tide. He keeps odd hours because he needs very few of them. The old lines say he sleeps less than a bird, which is impressive until you remember some birds catch micronaps on the wing. He does the same with thought closing exactly one corner of the mind at a time the way. Lighthouse keepers blink with one eye on the horizon. He has teeth of gold, which is possibly vanity, possibly a metaphor, and likely a joke among the Asir about his smile blinding thieves. In practice, the golden glint just helps him find his own reflection when the sky is dim. He polishes Fjalar not because it is dirty, but because polishing is a form of meditation. A thin cloth, a patient wrist, and the faint smell of oil that insists it is older than olives. The horn is quiet metal and older wood, and the grain under his thumb is the sort of texture that calms thoughts that prefer staircases. Nothing in this shift requires hurry. He counts travelers. He adjusts the angle of the bridge when Frost pretends it has a vote. He introduces the wind to new routes so it doesn't get bored. He is, above all, available. Listening is a craft in his hall. He hears a mouse negotiating with a cupboard in a farmhouse many hills away and decides to approve the treaty. He hears seals on a black beach telling jokes about oars. He hears the squeak of a hinge on a city gate and wonders why it prefers grief to grease. He hears grass growing, which is not as dramatic as it sounds. It is the sound of water remembering its responsibilities. He hears a couple in a fjord village arguing whether salted fish tastes better on the 4th day or the 5th. He hears poets testing lines under their breath while fetching water, which is how most poetry survives to the evening. He hears a needle slip, a child invent an alphabet for pine cones, and a raven pretend it didn't steal anything. This is not eavesdropping, it is filing. He runs a kind of cosmic inbox and keeps it at 0 by the gentle method of noticing. If something needs a nudge, he nudges it with attention. The night is full of small errands like that. Once, he leans down and brushes frost from Bifrost's loose color, and the ice whispers its excuse. It thought the red would keep it warm. He forgives the experiment and suggests it move up to green instead. Somewhere between midnight and distracting hunger, he checks the posts that anchor the bridge. They are not posts exactly. They are agreements turned into shape. Each one holds a rune that prefers to be dusted with fog rather than frost, and Heimdall's breath is perfect for this kind of housekeeping. He walks the first length of color, not startling it, just reminding it with his boots that is welcome to exist. He remembers that Bifrost doesn't like heavy feet and is very polite about oxen. He hums a note that makes the bridge's red sigh and the violet think about lamps. He scratches Goldtopper, his horse, along the line where mane agrees to be hair and the horse agrees not to tell Thunder any gossip. The animal is a good companion for quiet work, alert, proud, and possessed of a patience that can be mistaken for arrogance. Heimdall feeds him a handful of oats that taste, to the horse like applause. The next scene arrives on the slow tide of almost dawn. He leans against the parapet and looks far across the sea to a little island sleeping like a mitten lost at the edge of the world. There is a hut on the island and a wick lamp shining through horn panes and spilling a buttery rectangle onto the night. Inside, a woman threads a bone needle with stubborn linen and hums to keep the measure. Heimdall hears the tune make friends with the cloth. He hears the lamp agree that its job is to be kind, not bright. He hears a small worry breathe itself out. Listening from this height, wouldn't he impress storm gods? There are no mountains to wrestle, but it keeps the bridge honest. He can see other things at the edges of sight, the dull glitter of ice beyond the whale's opinions, the furred shadows of wolves who probably know too much. A little procession of dwarves moving through a pine wood, collectively pretending they lost their way just to see if the forest will answer. He registers each and lets them pass. Some nights he sees so far that the end of one world looks like the beginning of another, which is more of a housekeeping note than a revelation. Other nights he stares within arm's reach and lets distance take care of itself. Every so often, skalds and warriors wander up to the bridge at an hour when staying in bed would have been wiser. Heimdall greets them as if the hour had asked permission. He likes visitors who bring their own silence. A young skald might ask what Bifrost is made of, and Heimdall will say it is made of yes. A veteran might ask if it will hold a heavy heart, and he says it holds what crosses with intention. Someone inevitably asks about the horn, and he replies that good instruments improve by not being played. One warlike soul tries to peek into Fjalar and claims to see Dawn sleeping inside like a coiled cat. Heimdall pretends not to hear and smiles his gold-toothed smile that is famous for ending questions. If he offers advice, it comes folded inside ordinary chores. Oil the hinge, count the sheep. Taste your stew before explaining it. Keep the story on a short leash until it learns to heal. He can sound like a village auntie when he wants to, which is very effective with men who think mischief carries a sword. There is a piece of the world he watches most, the scene where Asgard's politeness meets Midgard's weather. On many nights, it behaves like an old married couple who learn to share a kettle, but sometimes it frays. The colors of the bridge shiver as if a thumb rubbed chalk on them. Heimdall lays his palm against the tremor, the way a mechanic lays a cheek against a hesitant engine, and he asks if the bridge would like a story. It does. He tells it about the time he learned to hear grass. It was not mystical. He knelt and listened to roots pulling water, and the sound made lines in his memory like field rows. He told the bridge that every blade's decision was a vote for green. That growing requires approval. That approval, when it is quiet and constant, makes a noise that the wind hums along to. The bridge relaxes. The seam remembers its manners. On his best nights, his job is only this: to say things so plainly that the world remembers it was obvious. Heimdall lives in Hnitbjorg, and because a watchman needs a kitchen more than a throne, the house includes a kettle that never thinks. It is boiling several hooks for hanging cloaks that have learned to dry themselves, and a shelf lined with cups that look identical but are not. He keeps tea, or a northern idea of tea, made from spruce tips that taste like clean pencils, and from dried berries that remember summer without bragging. He eats flatbread when he remembers to, with butter if the butter behaves. He keeps honey for guests and for the horn, because oiling a destiny with sweetness seems appropriate. His favorite knife is dull but dependable. It cuts an apple with 2 steady strokes and never pretends to be a sword. When a raven arrives with messages from other gods, he gives it crumbs and listens as if the bird was the author. The raven fake coughs in a way that suggests it is underappreciated at home. Heimdall makes no comment. He has discovered that gossip loses interest when given comfortable chairs. There is always a distant rumble in his job description, a line that mentions a final morning, and the horn that will shake the hills. He does not live with dread because dread is noisy, and noise is bad for the bridge. Instead, he treats the inscription like a flour jar labeled for a later recipe. He will use it when a certain door knocks. Until then, he keeps the jar sealed and the label visible. He polishes Fjalar until a person could see tomorrow in it, if tomorrow wanted to be seen. He tests it by balancing the horn across his forearms, measuring weight and angle, letting gravity memorize the tool. He knows precisely how much air it will ask of him, just as a shepherd knows the whistle that will call a dog from the far field. He never puts the horn away in a hurry. He arranges it as one would fold a quilt left to air. Children of Asgard who have slipped out after bedtime to see the rainbow of close small conspirators, disguised as wool, have asked him if the last sound will be pleasant. He replies that it will be accurate, which is the more merciful tone. As dawn finally remembers its appointment, Heimdall takes a long step along red, then orange, feeling the bridge warm under his boots. He can hear snowbanks backing away respectfully from the sun. He can hear a farmer's first cough and the hopeful clink of a pail. He can hear an old dog toss once and decide to accept the morning's terms. He closes his eyes and counts to the number that means enough, a number that changes daily and always feels like a round stone in the hand. He does not clock out. He shifts attention one notch, letting brightness stand guard for a few hours while he teaches. A cup to hold steam without scalding the fingers that meet it. Sometimes, when the air is thin and kind, he climbs to the topmost arch and sits with his knees up and lets his mind go blank in the correct way. Blank like fresh snow waiting for the first small paw prints. Blank like a door before anyone decides whether to knock or lean. Blank enough that if a new sound needed to be invented, a noise for kindness, a noise for honesty checking its laces, that sound would choose this moment to exist. Heimdall keeps a book of small inventories. He does not write in it every day. That would turn the book into a chore instead of a companion. He notes when the bridge learned a new creek and when the creek apologized. He notes what color the first swallow of spring brushed with its wingtip when it tested the arch. He notes the smell of the northern wind after 3 days away, and how it brought back pockets of salt and the memory of whales singing beneath the ice. He notes how long a raven can pretend it forgot his name. He stores the book on a high shelf where the pages can sigh together. If you ask to see it, he may let you, but he will insist that the paper be turned slowly and that you breathe at the same pace you read. By midday, other duties circulate. There is an inspection in Asgard of some banner ropes that have developed opinions. There is a short lesson in not shouting at clouds. There is a conversation with a gate that prefers to close itself exactly halfway and refuses to say why. Heimdall handles each with the same tools: attention, a cloth, a cup pressed into a surprised hand. He has learned that most problems calm down if they are seen doing their best. He offers the same method to himself. When the world feels like a chorus of small edges, he stands at the bridge and names the colors until the edges remember they are part of a rainbow and therefore teammates. Red cooperates, orange nods. Yellow brightens as if it had been waiting to be noticed. Green breathes out. Blue remembers it used to be river. Indigo corrects everyone's posture. Violet hides a laugh. It is all very undramatic and therefore perfect. Evening comes back to check on him, polite as ever. The sun lowers its voice and the birds stage a modest encore. Heimdall eats something that belonged to a root yesterday and listens to the soil say thank you. The night shift folds itself out of the twilight like a clean sheet. He lifts the horn once, only to feel its weight settle back where it belongs. He walks the length of color again and leaves no footprints because light is a poor archivist of tread. He greets the very first star as if it was a neighbor returning a hammer. He hears the little island's lamp again and recognizes the hum of needle through fabric, this time softer, this time confident and fit. He smiles the gold-toothed smile that forgives the dark for existing. And then he does what he always does. He waits. He listens to the last cart roll across a village square that will still be a square tomorrow. He hears a skull try a new metaphor and gently toss it out and then better fetch it back and relax each word until the sentence lies down without arguments. He tracks a fox trotting along a dike on soft feet, tagging it with a privacy label no one else can see. He notices dew beginning again, very small ballots being cast in favor of green. Somewhere far off, Thunder opens one eye and then politely closes it. If your own eyes want to close as well, he will keep watch. That is the point of him, after all, to stand where colors meet and hear the world choosing itself, over and over until morning decides to show its work. You might not expect eternity to be managed with a pantry ledger, yet that is how Icon keeps the gods feeling like the day after a good nap. She has an orchard whose trees are not precisely in Asgard and not precisely out of it, which is a very tidy piece of real estate for someone who prefers paths that arrive quietly. Each morning she walks the rows with a basket that seems small until it remembers its manners and becomes large enough, as baskets do when they like their owner. The apples are pale gold with a blush that looks painted on by patient bees. They are not ordinary apples, though sometimes they behave as if they wish to be. It is said that without them the Aesir would age the way candles do when someone forgets to trim the wick, but with them the years simply stack like folded blankets. If you're still awake in a few minutes, you can tap the little rune that promises another bedtime myth. If you drift sooner, the apples will accept this as proof that their scent works on mortals too. Icon hums as she counts, and the trees hum back, not in words, but in the way leaves consent to be counted. Her basket collects fruits with a sound like careful punctuation. She inspects each one with an appraiser's thumb, not pressing, only asking whether the skin still remembers spring. Some fruits carry tiny freckles resembling constellations that have not been invented yet. She notes them without assigning names. The orchard floor is thick with moss that refuses to be wet or dry, choosing a thoughtful middle, and her steps teach it the pace of housekeeping. She wears a knife so modest it apologizes for being sharp and a cloth that smells faintly of wax. The old poems call her the bearer of the apples, and scholars have spent comfortable winters debating whether they are truly apples or whether apple is a polite word for any fruit that makes time behave. Icon does not correct anyone. She knows that language likes to consolidate when it grows sleepy. She stores a few pears just in case. The trees tolerate this with good humor, which is a relief because trees can be particular. She keeps an eye on a graft she made 3 summers ago with a slip from a tree, whose roots claim to have brushed something suspiciously like Yggdrasil. The graft has taken well. It produces fruits that taste like metal warmed in sunlight, which sounds odd and is lovely. Her husband is Bragi, the one with the long beard and longer patience, and he sometimes walks with her between the rows, reciting verses about dew as if dew needed the advertisement. His poetry curls through the leaves and persuades bees to keep time. On days when Bragi stays in the hall teaching metaphors to apprentices who have brought their own metaphors just in case, Icon prefers the orchard's narrow music, the soft count of fruit into the basket, the click of the gate that has learned to mind itself, the whisk of a wren announcing that the next branch is taken. She keeps a ledger in a leather cover with the pleasant stiffness of well-behaved bread. The pages are ruled with faint runes at the margin so the numbers know where to live. Each tree has a name that sounds like a compliment disguised as weather. She notes what ripened, what rested, which limbs asked to be relieved of too much generosity. Once, a gust brought a rumor from the workshop of a dwarf who claimed he could copy her apples in silver. She smiled into her basket and let the rumor pass. Silver is fine for cups, but time prefers juice. By mid-morning, she opens the little gate that leads from the orchard to a low room built of ashwood, cool even when noon tries to persuade it otherwise. The room holds shelves, and the shelves hold crates, and the crates hold straw that remembers fields. Each crate has a rune pressed into the slat with a seal that warms in her palm. She does not label by date. She labels by feeling, which is an efficient, if controversial, method. Some crates are for days when a god has realized that grief and gratitude are cousins. Some are for evenings when courage would like a softer chair. Some are for afternoons when Thor arrives, looking like he has wrestled weather and would enjoy an excuse to sit very still. Icon sets the morning's harvest into the right boxes and hums the tune that reminds wood to be kind. She polishes a few fruits with a cloth dipped in a whisper of honey and a rumor of wax. The cloth knows when to stop. If an apple glows too much, the gods distrust it on principle. When she is alone, she bites one thin slice from the least promising fruit, decides it is better than it thought it was, and files that result under encouragement. Visitors use the side door that creaks in a reassuring way. Frigg comes with a list folded so neatly it stands up by itself and speaks about weaving schedules as if clouds could hear. Icon chooses a modest apple and asks whether the list would like one as well. Frigg smiles the way a mother smiles at a very competent child and tucks the fruit beside the list, which immediately stops standing up and relaxes against the cloth. Loki wanders in and peers at the labels as if they contain jokes he can borrow. Icon offers him a fruit from the crate marked for people who need to sit before they steal anything, and he laughs and pockets it without argument. Tyr stops by to run a finger along the wood grain, and Icon selects an apple for patience of old courage. Later, he returns the core with military neatness, which is a way of saying thank you in his dialect. When Odin arrives, he does not ask. He looks, and the apples look back, and a quiet exchange occurs, wherein a fruit chooses a man who has traded an eye for a sip elsewhere, and now simply needs the maintenance dose. She never counts what goes out in front of people. She counts later, in the ledger's slow handwriting that makes even subtraction feel like washing. Afternoons in the orchard are for repairs and persuasion. She coaxes an ancient tree to accept a new prop, a forked beam carved from a lightning-struck branch that still remembers applause. She mends a fence after a deer with opinions lodged them on the rails. She thanks the deer for participating in the ongoing conversation about limits. She gathers windfalls that have landed softly and decides which will be pressed into a syrup kept for travelers who prefer their youth by the spoonful. There is a press in the corner with a screw that sings when turned, and a basin that catches gold that behaves like weather in a glass. She sets aside a jar for the Norns, who dab it on the threads when a life needs a sheen to complete the pattern. The Norns do not pay in coin. They pay in the kind of information that makes pruning easier. This year the jar will go early. Somewhere a child has been born with a laugh so clear it will rescue a village from several future disagreements about fishing nets. Icon likes when payments arrive in advance. A small fact that pleases her: apples continue ripening after they are picked because the fruit remembers the tree and tries to be extra helpful. She allows this memory for a while and then asks it to rest, storing certain crates in the cool cellar that hums the note Moss prefers. On shelves near the floor, she keeps seeds not because she needs them, but because potential belongs somewhere. She writes their names on slips that fit exactly into the mouth of a clay jar, and each slip is folded like a secret but has already ached and decided to be content. Not every mythology tells you that the keeper of immortality is also a friend to future seedlings, but in truth the two jobs are the same shape: help things continue. Toward the easy turn of the day, Bragi returns to help with deliveries he pretends to call performances. He likes the giving speech almost as much as the tasting, and he arranges words with the calm flair of a librarian who has been allowed to alphabetize wind. They carry baskets along the corridor that links Icon's cool room with the brighter chaos of Asgard proper. At the threshold, she always wipes a crate's corners with a sprig of juniper, not for magic, exactly, but because juniper understands the hygiene of hope. In the great hall, benches wait like very modest thrones, and cups nudge each other with the etiquette of old friends. Icon sets an apple before a god, and another before a guest, and a third beside a harp, because instruments are moral people. She says very little. Sometimes she mentions the weather in the orchard. She might tell Thor that the red apples prefer rain without wind. She might inform Freya that the bee lanes were crowded, which means the honey will be opinionated in a month. She might nod at a scald and say a single word seep by, but she means take care with what you plant in ears. The second soft movement of the day is bookkeeping, which is not romantic in any realm, but can be beautiful when done kindly. Back in the cool room, she notes that the crate labeled for mending promises has one fruit left. The exact number a good promise likes to see when it approaches the shelf. She writes a line about a tree as lower limb learning better posture after a talk about balance. She marks that the barrel of syrup has developed a mood that suggests company would suit it. The ledger paper smells faintly of apple cores, which is how paper says it is grateful. She considers whether to adopt a new label for gods who have been very brave for an entire morning. She decides the old for afternoons tag already covers that case, because bravery is often a form of scheduling. Sometimes, toward evening, a mortal wanders near the orchard by accident in the way that maps sometimes trip. Icon has a bench just off the path for such accidents. She does not offer immortality to people who sit there. That is not how boundaries work. She offers water and a piece of ordinary fruit, and a little advice disguised as description. She talks about how apple trees prefer companionship and do best when planted in disagreement with themselves, two varieties near enough to quarrel gently across spring. She mentions pruning on a day when the air does not feel brittle. She observes that storing fruit in a drawer with a drying sprig of thyme helps the hum of winter. The mortal goes away, not immortal, but improved at living, which is arguably the point of many miracles that do not get billed as such. At the edge of the bench, there is a notch carved by generations of grateful elbows. Night asks for the orchard's keys, and Icon obliges because Night is a responsible neighbor. She walks one more row in the bluish light that makes every leaf look like a careful decision. She inspects the graft again and tells it a story about a branch that was patient and therefore strong. She listens to the small noises trees make when they remember to be trees. In the cool room, she tucks a throw over the nearest crates, as if fruit could get chilly, and perhaps it can in matters of spirit. She breathes across the horn-sealed rune on the door and feels it warm to her touch. Locks adore recognition. She leaves the ledger open to the page that announces the week's mood. Tomorrow's space is blank in the comfortable way of clean linen. Back in the hall, when the gods have finished their small toast and the benches have surrendered to the weight of good talk, A bowl of peels sits beside a knife that believes in circles. Icom likes to save peels for the sheep who live near the orchard, who nibble them as if the peels contain compliments. She ties the bowl with a cloth and sets it by the door. Bragi plays a measure that repeats until even the torches learn the chorus. Someone begins a story and nearly turns it into a saga, and Aitman's raised eyebrow persuades the tale to lie down and take a shorter nap. She is not against sagas. She is for bedtimes. A small oddity worth keeping. The apples do not bruise when the gods laugh. It has been tested many winters. This is fortunate because laughter is not on any ration plan. It ripples across the long table and folds under the benches and climbs the pillars like persistent ivy. And the fruits sit quietly as if they had expected exactly this. Icon tidies without tidying, the way good caretakers do. A cloth passes, a cup finds itself upright. A stray slice goes to someone who didn't know they were still hungry. She hears outside the snip of a cold star being cut free of cloud, and the orchard answers with that small nighttime click that means bark is settling into its own kind of sleep. When she finally steps out to the path, the basket stacked neatly and the door ruined content, she takes a slow breath and tastes the end of the day. The air holds wax and juniper and the distant decision of snow. Her knife hangs light at her belt, proud to have done nothing rash. She walks home with the bowl for the sheep, and the moss furs the stones for her feet. Tomorrow she will graft again, or maybe boil the last of the syrup to a thicker thought, or simply walk and count and let the ledger write itself by watching her hands. If your eyes are heavy, you can borrow her pace. A step a look a note, a breath a turn a gentle inventory. The smile of someone who has learned that immortality, when managed properly, behaves like well-kept. Fruit never loud, always present content, to sit on the shelf of the day until the moment arrives for one bright bite that tastes like rest. You might not think a whole river could fit beneath a bench, but that is exactly how Skolkvaker behaves on quiet days. The water slipping under the floorboards like a loyal footnote while the goddess Saga pours another round of conversation into cups that were polished by yesterday's tide. Her hall is not quite above the stream and not quite below it. It prefers the exact edge where driftwood pauses to think. She has arranged the benches so that everyone sits facing the current, which helps the mind resemble water and therefore forget urgency. The planks gleam with a kind of damp wisdom that keeps coasters from feeling necessary. It is said that Odin visits here often, though he comes without thunder or declarations, carrying only the posture of someone who has decided to hear the rest of the paragraph. If you're still awake in a few minutes, you can always tap whatever small rune on your screen invites you to follow these drowsy myths later. If you drift before, then Saga will mark you down as present the way a kind teacher counts sleeping students as a kind of attendance. The stream offers the reliable percussion of small eddies, deciding who will be roundest. A kettle sits at the back, and the lid trembles now and then, as if learning a new word for steam. Skogbacker means something like the sunken bench, though comfortably submerged seating may be closer to the point. The boards were once trees that watched swans, which explains why their grain enjoys the idea of gloss. Saga keeps shelves along the walls where the river is shy, and on those shelves sit cups, jugs, and little jars, each with a mark burned into the clay, so the vessels can recognize their responsibilities. Some hold ale for courage, some hold mead for memory, and a few hold water so patient it could teach clocks to whisper. The goddess herself is less a figure than a habit, a well-kept routine, wearing a dress the color of whetstone. Her hair behaves like river grass that has learned table manners. The old books call her Cirrus, and sometimes blend her with Frigg in the way maps let two towns share one dot. Saga seems unbothered by this. She knows names work like bridges, carrying traffic both ways whether or not each traveler reads the sign. A raven perches on the window ledge to listen, clean and theatrical. pretending it is not taking notes for later. The bird does not steal anything obvious, it prefers verbs. Odin arrives as a man who has walked in rain and allowed the rain to win. The one-eyed matter is true, but his missing coin looks less like a wound here and more like a decision already reconciled with its receipt. He carries no spear. He has left the ravens at the door to practice being shy. He sits where he always sits, on the bench that knows the shape of his patience, and Saga hands him a cup that has learned exactly the weight of his grip. They drink not for thirst, but for alignment. The liquid behaves like a reminder rather than a surprise. Some days it tastes of heather and something hard to translate that we might call reliable sunlight. Other days it tastes like the inside of new barrels and the outside of old advice. Tonight it tastes faintly of honey that survived winter without commentary. Odin lifts the cup, and the river under the floor lifts with him, because rivers enjoy applause as much as anyone else. Their talk does not race, it walks. Saga has a voice like reeds building a fence. Odin answers with sentences that feel carved at the ends where they mean it. They speak about the kind of days that look empty but become the best folders in the archive. He brings news from elsewhere, a shepherd who mediated a dispute between two stubborn hills by moving his flock in a circle that both sides admired. A little boy who learned the rune for gift and wrote it on a door frame just to see if the hinge would behave better. A pocket full of new proverbs that have not chosen their winter coats. Saga brings news from water, a trout that made a metaphor by accident and then committed to it. A willow that braided itself to remember a friend. A sandbar that decided to move 2 inches east in order to improve a reflection. Sometimes she writes these items into a ledger by dipping a reed pen into a shallow dish of ink that insists on behaving like tide. The book is goatskin, but it smells faintly of moss, as all the best records do. There is a small table near the door that has specialized in maps. On it lies a cloth that shows the 9 realms not as circles, but as meetings of weather. Midgard is the place where bread happens almost without trying. Asgard, high and lucid, is drawn as a field that returns calls promptly. Vanaheim smells like dark soil and polite rain. Niflheim is a large idea wrapped in mist, and therefore kind to skin. Jotunheim has boulders labeled with shy runes, because giants prefer footnotes to headlines. Alfheim is the corner where light rehearses. Hell is stitched with a thread so calm it makes readers want to sit down. Muspel is shown only by warmth along the cloth's edge, because fire in a reasonable house agrees to be suggested rather than performed. Saga traces the rivers with 2 fingers and pauses where they thicken under mountains. Odin listens, and when he nods, the nod looks like fishing. Not much happens in this hall unless you count the way cups come and go like tides. Saga wipes down the board after each story as if stories were tools that should be cleaned before being put away. She keeps small plates of cheese, the sort that behaves when sliced thin, and little bricks of rye bread that are proud of their jobs. The meals here do not try to impress anyone. They are the sort of food that looks up when named. Odin eats like a man who once did without to make a point and has since learned to keep the point on the shelf. There is a drawer that contains coiled lengths of string with knots at regular intervals. The string is for measuring sagas by hand, since the mind can be imprecise when presented with enthusiasm. 2.5 strings, Saga might say of a tale that threatens to multiply with each telling, and the storyteller will nod, aware that multiplying is a kind of spilling, and that spilling belongs to a different hall. Every now and then, someone else comes in. Bragi will drift through with a verse he swears is new, even though it smells of old friends. He recites it into his cup, and the foam remembers the meter. Frigg appears with domestic weather at her heels and leaves a folded thought on the windowsill, as if it were a handkerchief. Thor visits like a well-timed gust, cradling the fragile parts of himself the way a slow blacksmith carries glass. He drinks quietly and studies the water as if it were hammering something. Loki stands in the doorway just long enough for the river to practice looking innocent. He asks a question no one needs, and then answers it himself with a grin that has learned to hide its edges. Saga lets each visitor be exactly the size their day requires. She is very good at letting people be their approximate. There is a soft ceremony that begins whenever the kettle sternly declares it has been ignored. Saga turns the flame down so it will feel listened to. She adds herbs that smell like rain that has met pine in a fair fight and lost gracefully. She pours into cups that have learned restraint. Odin wraps both hands around his cup as if it were a small fire that could be convinced to tell the truth. They speak about the grammar of riverbanks, how edges teach flow, how in the winter the ice carries sentences above the water, the way librarians carry books above puddles. They compare ways of remembering. Odin's memory is a hall staffed by ravens and aprons. Saga's memory is a drawer with dividers made of light. They trade tiny facts with the seriousness of children swapping shells. Did you know, she asks, that a reed pen writes differently if you tell it the truth first? Did you know, he answers, that the word for breath and the word for spirit visit the same stool at the same tavern? The river under the floor makes a long, satisfied sound, like someone turning over on a comfortable bed. Not every item in Skogvakker is old. On one shelf sits a clean clay pitcher stamped with a rune that no one has seen before. It means something between patience and opportunity. It means leave this alone for now and it will become useful. Saga labels it later. Beside it is a set of coasters someone gave her as a joke. She pretends not to know what they are for. Odin moves his cup onto one and looks very pleased with himself, as if he has contributed to civilization. There is also a little box of beads that can be threaded into stories when a story insists on wearing jewelry. Children who sometimes visit small gods, polite monsters, apprentices whose thoughts are still unwrinkled are allowed to choose a bead to place at the end of a tale. The bead falls with a soft clink that declares the tale finished for now, not closed forever. Saga believes in endings that keep their shoes on. Outside, the banks slope in a way that makes strangers relax without noticing. The grass has learned to be sturdy and soft, which is a rare degree. Birds use the railing to practice leaving and returning. A pair of ducks keep a calendar no one else can read, and arrive just when a conversation has earned a pause. On the far shore, a willow growing in slow lowercase leans into the stream to check whether it has been spelled correctly. Runes carved into the low stones at the landing record tides rather than conquests. Saga will step outside between cups and scan the water for news, and the water will tell her about a fallen branch caught against a rock, and she will listen as if branches deserve quartz. She never hurries the stream with her eyes. She knows that when you watch water too sharply, it tries to act, and acting is not the point here. There is, of course, a quiet mystery about how stories leave this room to become the ones humans tell later over planks and mugs and laundry lines. The likely method is wicking. The river under the floor draws words the way cloth draws liquid. It takes them to a bend where trout like to vote and then brushes them against stones that know how to archive without becoming prisons. From there, the phrases travel downstream disguised as ordinary breath until a person bending to pick up a spoon suddenly recalls a sentence with the right number of steps in it. Another theory says Saga herself unspools a thread over the sill each night, and the water carries the thread to a shore where a weaver is waiting. But that sounds like giving the job a costume it doesn't need. The simpler explanation is best. Rooms that are arranged carefully teach the world outside how to arrange itself. Late in the evening, when the conversation has earned a bench nap, Saga begins the reset. She rinses each cup with the kind of water that warms to its task. She stacks the wood in the corner so the pile can feel it has participated. She writes 2 or 3 words in the ledger today. Willow agreeable and dots the I in a manner that makes dotting feel like a vow. Odin stands and lets his hands remember how to be empty. He looks once more at the map cloth and nods at the place where Midgard wrinkles, as if smoothing a sheet with his mind. He thanks Saga without needing the word. She answers without using the word "you're welcome." The river, now a dark belt around the hall, whispers something like "yes, the same tomorrow," and all the furniture agrees, even the coasters. On nights when the moon chooses to be a thin coin rather than a generous plate, Saga leaves a lamp on the sill. The lamp has a very small wick that believes in its job. It burns whale oil politely, asking nothing extravagant from the past. The lamplight pours a small road into the dark, and travelers who see it think, there's the place where stories wash their hands. Some do not know why the thought comforts them. They only know their shoulders lower an inch. A fisherman checks his knots and remembers, without being told, the proper way to teach a child to tie a bowline. A grandmother at a hearth realizes a pause is a tool and wields it. A young woman stitching a shoe finds a better word for the person she loves, a word that fits in the ankle without blisters. The lamp has helped. It will ask no thanks. When the night wants closing, the river offers a final report in the language of eddies. Saga listens the way bakers listen to dough. She tells the water that tomorrow she will try a new cup that seems to prefer proverbs. And she will move the table 2 finger widths closer to the window so a breeze can practice sincerity. She will teach the new reed pen to trust the ledger. She will ask the willow if it would like a visiting stone to lean on. She will not rearrange much, because rearranging is what people do when they fear silence. The hall is not afraid. It believes in chairs that keep promises. It believes in cups that end a thought rather than interrupt it. It believes in water that takes notes. If you are listening at the outer edge of sleep, this would be a fine place to set your cup down. Imagine the bench settling a little to fit you. Imagine the river underneath performing its small accounting of daybreaks and boots. Saga will put a hand on the plank beside yours, and that will be enough of a blessing. Odin will finish his cup and set it on the coaster as if he invented manners, which he probably did, at least for tonight. The raven on the sill will pretend not to have learned anything and will fly off reluctantly to leak truth in modest quantities. The map cloth will fold itself neatly, as maps always do when they are sure they will be unfolded tomorrow. The stream will nudge the hall once more, motherly and amused. And the room, which is also a story, will close its eyes without fully closing them, ready to keep you company even when you forget it is there. Ready to hold the river in place while you drift ready to set out 2 cups in the morning for whoever wakes first. You might not think a few runaway drops could change how people speak to their bread and to their neighbors, yet that is how the world remembers the day. The sky briefly forgot to be a lid, and Odin's careful flight shook a little honeyed rain loose over. Midgard, a soft drizzle of permission that landed on door lintels and fishing nets and the patient backs of spoons. The story prefers large birds and balds with clever locks, but this last bit is quiet housekeeping, almost embarrassing in its simplicity. And if you still awake in a few minutes, you welcome to follow along again some other night or not. Sleep is a perfectly valid sign of appreciation in this hall, and spilling yourself into the pillow is thematically on brand, because the Mead did exactly that, only slower and with better posture. The first place it touched, in some tellings, was a scrap of inland marsh where a man with a bent knife was cutting rushes for chair seats and counting in an unmusical way. And when the droplet found his cheek, he discovered he could count to 8 without losing his place, and could also describe the mud as a second sky where frogs commute, which impressed no one at the time, but later made his daughter laugh so hard she stopped being angry at the rain, which is a small miracle and therefore worth recording, beside the larger ones that prefer capital letters, and in this manner the drops proceeded one by one across a mat that pretends it is large until a story walks it barefoot. The old poets had a word for this accidental distribution, skaldfaflater, the fool's share of the mead. which sounds unkind until you understand that most of us are the kind of fool who tries to talk about a sunrise without inventing at least one polite lie. And the Mead forgives the lie, pats it on the head, and translates it into a line that fits in the mouth without splinters. Somewhere a woman kneading rye dough looked up at nothing in particular and told the dough it was a small brown ship with a crew of seeds, and the dough worked harder after that, as if promotions were possible in bread. Somewhere a herder humming to keep the flock counted found herself humming in dactyls, which is a rhythm that makes hills feel admired. Somewhere a young man carving a thole pen for his father's boat felt a drop land on the back of his hand and immediately compared spruce to bone, which is not strictly accurate unless you consider responsibilities, and then it is perfect. All of this happened in the sleepy half-light after the eagle had passed and the giant had given up the chase, and the sky, mildly embarrassed, decided to keep the rest of the lid on. If you pace the tale slowly enough, you can feel the four currents that carry it, and the first is the fall itself, which was not a fall so much as a leisurely reconsideration of altitude. The drops were small but not shy, and each kept a bubble of air like a traveling lantern, and inside that lantern the memory of Kvasir and Bone and Sun, the three vats whose names sound like kitchen measurements, spoken by a kindly aunt chimed like spoons against crockery. The liquid is said to grant poetry and learning, which in practice means it helps mouths and minds share a table without arguing about chairs. And the strange part is that the drops preferred hands that were busy with other things, as if the Mead suspected that idle tongues are unreliable narrators. In a byre where a calf was discovering the administrative region known as legs, a farmhand muttered "slow thunder" and smiled as if he had discovered a legal loophole in gravity. On a rocky beach, a girl collected shells and explained to the waves that the spiral is a kind of staircase for ears, and the waves applied for a permit and were approved. In a smoky room, a weaver licked a thread and said it tasted like rain rehearsing manners. The drops did not organize a movement or announce a school. They simply allowed nouns and verbs to sit closer together until they recognized each other from earlier. Scholars like to point out that later ages blamed bad verses on the fool's share too, which is fair, as not every droplet landed on a good day. And even enchanted moisture cannot prevent a teenager from rhyming sword with ford and insisting it is new. Still, the general upward trend was noticeable to anyone who had toasting to do. And toasts are the gym where language practices being kind in public, so improvement there matters more than epics admit. If you have ever thanked a kettle for its patience, you are already a shareholder in this trickle-down miracle, and you owe dividends only in the form of continuing to talk to objects as if they were colleagues. The second current is the way these drops learn to travel through wood and skin, and then into rumor, which is a perfectly legitimate canal system. A single glitter landed on the rim of the cup, and from there found the tongue of an apprentice carpenter, who subsequently began calling his plane the silence broom, which improved the finish of the shelves. A fleck struck the nail of a midwife whose hands already knew more than cities, and she began teaching young mothers that breath is a knot you tie in the dark, and don't worry if it needs retightening, which is perhaps the best point ever made with no citation. One tiny fall touched a flint, and that evening the sparks that leapt into the tinderbox looked, to the man watching, like bees deciding on a church, and he said it aloud, and everyone present remembered it in their bodies. Much later, someone painted that scene on a chest lid, and the paint refused to fade because the wood liked the sentence. In another place, a tent maker pricked his thumb, and the droplet mixed with a bead of blood, and he announced that the stitch holds, because the fabric believes in circles, which is a thought strong enough to repair a quarrel if you pass it around with bread. This is how the mead moves when not stored in respectable vats under vigilant guardians. It wicks along edges and considers furrows and attends chores. And because chores are the lawful neutral of existence, poetry thriving there causes little political unrest, which the gods appreciate. Odin, for his part, sat in a high seat and pretended to be surprised by reports from ravens, who claimed a new density in village. Talk as if gossip had learned to moisturize, and he nodded without smirking, because smirking is for temporary victories. Gunnlod back at Hnitbjorg with her quiet torch, and her more interesting silence, may have felt the echo in the stone, and smiled in a way that registered as warmer walls. But the poem does not lean too hard into that, because dignity is a currency in caves, and we are paying it forward by not counting. The third current is a catalogue of small proofs, and it arrives like a market wandering into a lane that was already doing fine. In a longhouse where the smoke behaved only out of habit, a boy poured water into a trough and described the ripple as the world's handwriting practicing. And though his father laughed, he remembered the phrase when he raised a roof beam later and set it straight because words had asked him. A skald in training, assigned to memorize a list of kings and their legally binding cheekbones, started whispering the names to a rhythm that made the list feel like knots you could undo with one tug, which is exactly how knowledge should sit in the hand. A fisherman with no time for metaphors declared that the sea was wearing its good shirt, and afterward looked for excuses to fish a little less, which pleased his wife and confused the cod not at all. On a stone where nobody expected writing, someone scratched a line and then scratched a line under it, equal but not identical, and a passerby understood the first joke ever committed to granite. The drops did not enforce taste, they merely extended the warranty of noticing. They encouraged the long Scandinavian habit of understatement, which is the art of putting the whole fjord into a shrub, so nobody drowns. They refine the kenning, that little trick of describing a whale road for sea or a battle sweat for blood, which is amusing until you realize it is a way of keeping terror at arm's length while still counting it, like balancing salt on your thumb before you throw it into soup. A handful of people gained too much confidence and tried to call potatoes earth eggs, which did not stick. But you have to admire the attempt. Priests of other gods decided to dislike this explanation for eloquence, and then, after a drop struck the hem of one robe, wrote sermons that are still remembered because they told farmers to care for tools with the same respect they give to promises. And in a dozen villages, the legal phrase, with words well weighed, began appearing on carved sticks that recorded agreements, because both parties suspected the mead encouraged lawyers too, and thought it best to keep the drink on their side by praising its manners. The fourth current brings us back to the slow moral, which is that spills are not always errors. The mead was brewed by dwarves under a premise that involved a murder and several strong opinions about compensation. It was guarded by a giant who did his due diligence with mountains and lids. It was borrowed by a god who has an advanced degree in disguised logistics. And in the end, the world received the part that could not be contained by any plan. The fool's share that slipped the buckle and went looking for sentences without uniforms, which is why quiet people started telling better toasts and tired people began naming their fatigue. Tenderly and gruff people learned to pat the dog with thematic consistency. The myth ends loudly in other halls, with horns lifted and debts settled, and the excellent sound of vats being properly labeled. But here the ending chooses to be a tide that keeps showing up, and the tide prefers to arrive when you're doing dishes or stacking firewood or mending a coat, because those are the hours when the mind agrees to be helpful without being the boss. It is pleasant to think that a few drops went astray on purpose, that Odin angled one feather and pretended not to see the little glitter fall that Suttungr, coasting on a tired wing, allowed a yawn large enough to loosen a punctuation mark in the air, that the sky itself decided to be a little porous in honor of future villagers who would need something kind to say before bread and after weather. We will never know whether any of that happened, and certainty is overrated at bedtime. What we have, and what the story likes to leave on the bedside table, is the suggestion that inspiration is not a thunderbolt but a polite leak, that wisdom lives in barrels until it doesn't, That language is a communal pot you add to with a wooden spoon you inherited from someone who didn't he explain it. And that somewhere on a night like this, a drop is still falling terribly slowly, choosing its blade of grass. And when it lands, a person will say something truer than usual about the way their small town smells when it rains. And someone else will copy the sentence into memory, where it will ferment gently beside bread and patience. And if your own breathing has been keeping time with the long pour of this tale, you are already in the right company, and the last of the words can keep seeping like sweetness through a cloth. Nothing urgent, nothing final, just a soft trickle of permission for your thoughts to drift until they, too, spill quietly into sleep.